Ron Paul's also a repeat guest on the radio show of Alex Jones, now who has suggested the United States government was involved in 9/11 attacks. Earlier this month, Ron Paul discussed with Jones the recent plot allegedly by Iranian operatives to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington. Paul called the story that they were out to get the Saudi ambassador a propaganda stunt. Let's listen to the two of them, Alex Jones and Ron Paul.
There was this so-called attempt to kill the Saudi or the Iranian ambassador. You know, that kind of stuff is just way too much.
And even mainstream media had to admit that was totally phony and a pretext to attack Iran.
Yeah, that was the real excuse to blame it on them. It's just another propaganda stunt as far as I'm concerned.
So the government of the United States is, I mean, I understand there's neocons out there who would like us to go after Iran, and a lot of other people, too, as well, who care about Israel, care about our security. I understand that argument. But to suggest the United States would put together a phony plot to go after the Saudi ambassador just so we could do it, that would build the case against Iran, is that credible talk?
Doesn't seem like it, but you know, a lot of people are talking about Ron Paul's views on national security and foreign policy generally, and that it's out of line with the mainstream of the Republican Party. But I'm not so sure that some of his views, now that's a little bit different, but generally speaking that we shouldn't have Iran sanctions and we shouldn't go after Iran. You know, I think you're finding that the Republican electorate is shifting a little bit.
I'm going to ask you.
We're sitting down with Michael Scheuer, the man who had served in the CIA for more than 20 years, up until 2004. At one time, he was the chief of the CIA bin Laden unit. What do you make of these recent accusations that the Iranian government was trying to kill the Saudi ambassador in Washington?
I'm not in a position to know whether or not the information was accurate. But when I was a young intelligence officer, I worked against Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah. And I can tell you, in the 90s, they were meticulous in covering their tracks and only using as agents of terrorism their own people. The plot that was described by the Attorney General of the United States is a comic opera.
Through a Mexican drug cartel.
Yeah, and to believe that the Iranians would risk war with the United States, Israel, and much of NATO to kill a Saudi ambassador who was not even part of the royal family, that's hard for me to believe.
Joining us by phone from Virginia is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer. Colonel Schaefer, it's always a pleasure. What is your take on this alleged terror plot involving Iran? Is this the way the Iran intelligence agencies usually operate, engaging with somebody they thought were involved with Mexican drug gangs to assassinate a Saudi Arabian ambassador in a public restaurant in New York or Washington?
Well, it's a long way to get to a much easier target in other places, and no, I don't think so. And obviously, I've interrogated the Iranians. It's two chapters of my book, Operation Dark Heart, are dedicated to this, and that's what makes me think twice about this. The American that they're accusing here, Judge, was true enough. He has a dual passport, Iranian-American, but frankly, my experience has been directly that these people love being here. Once they're here, they love being here. And the idea of this guy, all of a sudden, after years being a successful, by all accounts, a successful used car salesman in Texas, part of the community, I would think it would be very difficult to imagine him just all of a sudden deciding that he's going to go against everything he's done for the past, for the past 15 years to do this. It does not smell correctly at this point in time.
All right. Well, give me, if you would, your best estimate as to what does spell correctly. For example, is it possible that this Iranian American is a double agent who wanted to trick the government of the United States of America into taking some action against Iran? Is it likely that the FBI concocted this whole thing, and because it was a sting, nobody was ever in danger? There was never a real plot. This guy was plotting with FBI agents who he thought were Mexican drug lords. What does Colonel Schaefer think really went down here?
I think that's part of it. I think the reason it came out now is literally this is red meat to a bunch of lions. I think this is why they threw it out now at this point, not in September. Secondly, yeah, the FBI has had a record lately, and I did talk to one of my inside guys today, and he is saying that he thinks the same thing. You know why? Because he can't find any real information, and he's got a clearance. So that tells him that there's something going on that's extraordinary by the fact that he's an inside, investigator knows what's going on, and yet, and I'm going to quote here, there's nothing on this within the DOJ beyond what they've talked about publicly, which means to him there's something very wrong with it.
Now to the United States, where a former intelligence analyst is warning the Obama administration to step back from blaming Iran for the foiled assassination plot against the Saudi ambassador in Washington. Robert Bayer spent 21 years working as a CIA case officer in the Middle East. When he spoke to me this morning, he said this plot does not appear to him to be driven by the Iranian government. Robert Bayer, were you surprised when you heard about this assassination plot?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right now is not the time for Iran to provoke the United States. We're on edge already vis-a-vis Iran, and it came as a total surprise to me.
The Iranian authorities have dismissed this as US propaganda. Is it credible that the Iranian government is behind it?
I don't think it's credible. This doesn't fit their modus operandi at all. It's completely out of character. They're much better than this. They wouldn't be sending money through an American bank. They wouldn't be going to the cartels in Mexico to do this. It's just not the way they work. I've followed them for 30 years, and they're much more careful. And they always use a proxy between them and the operation. And in this case, they didn't. I mean, it's either they're shooting themselves in the foot, or there's pieces of the story I don't know what they are. I just cannot get over the fact, though, and I have to come back to this, the Iranians are not that sloppy to plan something like this and then call back to Tehran. So I can't explain what's going on here.
So are you suggesting that the US Attorney General is actually speaking out too soon in blaming the Iranian government?
I think he is.
Let me be very clear here. I'm not pro-Iranian by any circumstance of the imagination. I have seen what these people, what the Iranian IRGC has been doing to try to kill our soldiers. So there's no way in heck that I would ever come out for the Iranians. With that said, I think we have to understand that we're playing a chess game, and simply, pushing our military towards a kinetic solution is not the best solution here. And what concerns me is that this, as you mentioned in the introduction, this operation just smells, this assassination concept smells of a plot. But frankly, what we're looking at here is a plot where 24 meets the Sopranos, which makes me, obviously it's great for fiction, but I think the reality of which we're faced with is entirely different. I mean, and let me tell you, as an intelligence professional, this used car salesman would be the last individual in the world that I, as a professional intelligence officer, would direct to get in contact with a drug group to become a group of assassins. Let me tell you, on the face of that, that is beyond any operational knowledge that any intelligence officer would do. You just don't trust someone with that lack of focus and training to do something that would be that key and critical to an assassination plot. It's just not done. This could be, again, a provocation by someone here who basically wanted this to be caught. And again, I've talked to a number of intelligence professionals, many of which, Alex, are and again, like you've already said, these guys and gals are not pro-Iranian, but they've told me, based on their experience, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy, that based on their experience, this basic format does not add up to any known format for a successful intelligence operation. If you're really
but it does fit the format that we've seen hundreds of times the last few years of the FBI setting up mentally ill patsies, or just purely setting people up. And as you mentioned, the affidavit, it's in the news today with those that have seen the affidavit that it was the informant running the whole thing, and this was just some idiot trying to be part of a drug deal and make some money, and that it isn't even designed to hold up later. It's just a pretext to launch a war. So I want to, Colonel Schaefer, I want to go back here specifically, because this is what everybody really wants to understand. Tell us as much as you can about your high-level FBI Justice Department source with the security clearance. You said you've met with them again just to make sure what they told you was correct. You said in the last segment that yes, and more. What are they telling you about this not being in their files, not being in their computer system?
Well, there's three things notable. First, obviously, if you're on the inside, this is kind of common sense. The first thing you're going to do if you're a security expert with an interest or responsibility in terrorism, you're going to look at this to see if it means something to you directly. So a lot of these guys will sit down and go through, because they have the clearance, they'll start doing research within the classified realm to find out what's going on. Well, the first point, Alex, was when these friends of mine decided to go check it out, is like, There's nothing there. And that's highly suspect because normally the government, especially inside, wants to brag about what it's done well. And, oh, by the way, if there's a threat that's derivative of this that you need to be concerned about, they put it out there. So, again, in this case, there's nothing really out there from what they're telling me. Now, again, I don't have direct access. I'm going with what they've told me. So that.
And by the way, this thing goes back months and months and months, so it's also an older case.
I mean, you're right. It sounds like a Hollywood script dreamt up by a neocon in Washington. I mean, it is their ultimate dream come true. So, you know, we've seen before the lead up to the Iraq war, all these things that were definite, absolutely, oh my God, Saddam with the nuclear weapons and the mushroom cloud in 45 minutes. And how dare you question the American government? Of course that's true. Then we saw with Jose Padilla that he was supposed to be a dirty bomber who was going to blow up buildings in Chicago. And it turns out we had absolutely no evidence of that. That wasn't true at all. How dare you question the American government? Look at how convenient this is. Here's the other parts of the story that started to get fishy once you read more into the details. Apparently, this guy put $100,000 in the account of a guy that he believed to be part of the Mexican drug cartel that turned out to be a DEA agent. And he wired it from a bank in New York. The Quds Force in Iran doesn't know that we monitor every transaction above $10,000 here in the U.S. that goes through those banks? Oh, that's a rookie mistake that is nearly unthinkable. And they're going to trust for their, I mean, they haven't done an attack on U.S. soil in forever, maybe ever, right? And the one time they're going to do it, they're going to get a Mexican drug cartel that they trust, a guy that they didn't even know that turned out to be a narc agent, and then the government is going to say, go, yeah, let's get them to do the hit. This sounds so incredibly fishy. And then Attorney General Holder comes out and says the things that need to be said in terms of scaring us about Iran. First, he says, quote, this plot was conceived, sponsored, and was directed from Iran. Now, even if you think you got the right guy, you're positive that it links back to the Quds Force and it links back to the Iranian government who gave the orders for it. How could you be positive? You haven't presented any evidence in that regard, right? But then here comes the killer quote. Now, unfortunately, it might be literal at some point. Quote, the U.S. is committed to holding Iran accountable for its actions. In other words, we got what we wanted. There are the great majority of the people inside Washington, not the people inside the country in America, but in Washington, can't wait to attack Iran. So they turn around and they go, look at this. They're going to kill our allies' envoy here on United States soil. We got to do something. We have to do something. Now, after my original doubts about the story, I started reading what some of the experts thought. And I read at least half a dozen, probably closer to a dozen experts in the Middle East saying, this story doesn't make any kind of sense. Let's start with the CIA. Robert Baer is a former CIA case officer in the Middle East, so obviously an expert on this. He says, quote, Quds Force has never been this sloppy. Using untested proxies, contracting with Mexican drug cartels, sending money through New York bank accounts, and putting its agents on U.S. soil where they risk being caught. He was obviously incredibly skeptical about that. He also went on to say, quote, sloppiness about the case that defies belief. In other words, he literally can't believe that the Quds Force is behind this, as the U.S. government is claiming. That's the former CIA agent whose job was to track the Middle East and knows about the Quds Force. He also said at one point, if the Quds Force wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. They're not going to be amateurs and do this sloppy job where they're like, I don't know, can we get a Mexican guy to kill this incredibly important, the most important hit we have ever sanctioned in the history of the Quds Force? Can we just get some sloppy guy to do it? Oh, by the way, the guy that they have caught, now here's the parts you're going to love, okay? When I go to the other experts and I look into the case further to see what this guy's about, he already has a fraud conviction in the United States. Some of the other experts say, wait, you telling me that the Quds Force would use a guy that the New York system and the U.S. federal system already is tracking because he has a criminal record? Again, inconceivable, right? And then you go and look into his interrogation and what happened. Somehow, the FBI does not have the first 2 months of his interrogation. They're missing, okay? And then you look into the second part. Apparently, when he started cooperating, or when they started, in fact, almost immediately, as soon as they got him, he said, I don't need a lawyer. I'll tell you everything. Here are two quotes from their Washington Post article on this. Quote, It also would reflect a radical shift in tactics for a country that usually prefers to leave its dirty work to proxies, meaning Hezbollah, etc., in Lebanon is the way they operate. They don't just go in there and go, "Ooh, it's us. Who can we kill on U.S. soil?" And then last quote for you guys. The brazenness of the plot outlined by Justice Department officials struck many current and former U.S. officials as out of character for Iran. If you got the Washington Post shaking their head going, really? This story stinks to high heaven, okay?